Hello and welcome back to the worst War Machine channel on the internet. I'm Dorian, and this is Dorian Weekly with another topic from our Patreon content overlords. Either voting on the topics I'm going to be talking about or actually telling me specifically what ones I need to do. And today, the one they voted on was for me to be talking about Clashmachine. Now, for those who don't know what Clashmachine is, let's kind of talk about some of the other things that's going on. We got Steamroller, that is the Privateer Press standard tournament package that they have out there for you. And then a little while ago, at the start of the pandemic, we had our Brawl Machine come out, right? Brawl Machine coming out, being developed by Line of Sight, designed specifically for 25 points. And, when that first came out, there was a lot of grumbles like, why do we need this? We could be playing 25 points in Steamroller. But it's turned out to be a pretty fantastic thing, right? Lots of people are like, yeah, this actually is very balanced for 25 points. It's great for bringing in new players. It's been getting a big thumbs up from everyone, including Privateer Press, which is, I'm super happy that they came in and support it. So now, this new thing, Clashmachine, came out. Now, when I say came out, you have to realize this was not really ready for implementation and rollout. I listened to the podcast. I kind of learned about the ideas where this is something that they were kind of like talking about as an idea and then kind of posted on the Line of Sight Discord and then just got shared and, people jumped all over it. So, think of an idea where it turns out there's some producers on Facebook and they're like, you know what? Like I've been throwing around some ideas, what do you think of this idea? Like, oh, I don't know. What if we somehow make it work for Deadpool and Spider-Man? What are some ideas? And then everyone's like, oh my god, Spider-Man is coming here. It's official. It's been leaked. It's that type of thing. We're this is the very beginning. This is not even a, early rules release, a beta, anything like this. This literally came out as kind of an idea. And now it had to kind of run with it, which was really bad timing because, Jaden from Line of Sight is also having a baby or already had a baby. So, there's going to be a while till they have time to develop this. But hey, let's talk about this right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to kind of read through this. It's only 2 pages right now. So very easy to go over what this idea of Clashmachine is. Even that idea, I learned that, the name, they might be changing the name. So not even that settled on. But we'll talk about what's in here. And then as we go through this, we're going to be talking about some of the ideas around it and, what my thoughts are. So the very first thing here is, what is the army construction? So this is designed for 50-point games. So, 25, 50, 75, kind of have the gambit now. And what it says here is that the rules are your field allowance for most of your things are now set to 2. So in Brawl Machine, it was FA1. Now we're going to FA2. Now there's some other things in here talking about weapon attachments and stuff that you buy in multiples, right? If you buy 2 Crabbits, okay, now you can buy 4 Crabbits as 2 choices. If you're getting weapon teams, 3 weapon teams for 1 unit, 3 weapon teams for another unit, that's your FA2. So it really kind of explains how that kind of works type thing. The other thing here too is that the max field allowance for Colossals, Gargantuans, Battle Engines, blah, blah, those all, it's not really FA1. It took me a second to realize the difference here. It's why don't you just say huge bases are FA1? Huge bases were not allowed in Brawl Machine, so why don't you say they're FA1 here? But what the wording here stops you from doing is taking 1 Blockader and 1 Galleon. So you're allowed to have 1 Colossal, 1 Battle Engine, 1 structure, that type of a thing, just to make sure that each of these categories, you're only having 1 and not cheating the system if you have access to 2 good Colossals or 2 good Battle Engines or something like that. That's really it. There's no other epic list for these are the casters that aren't allowed, these are the units and things that aren't allowed. That's literally it. Go and make your army that's 50 points is now FA2, huge bases, we already talked about that. That's really it. But then it kind of goes on and there's some more interesting things going on here. In here, they kind of added these new scenario elements. So in here, what they're kind of talking about is you still have your 12-inch circle. That's still the normal thing going on. You still have your 12-inch by 6-inch rectangle. That's still a thing. But they have 2 new ones. And the first one here is going to be a 6-inch circle. I still have some of my old, a lot of you guys might not remember, but in the old days, we had lots of different size things that are going on there. I still have some of my old 8-inch circles. I don't think I have any 6-inch, but anyway, there's now 6-inch circles that can be scored by solos, units, and battle group commanders. They kind of have a new phrase there, so you don't have to say like warcasters, warlocks, and infernal masters. It's all just now battle group commanders. So it's kind of really just like a new zone that at first I kind of thought like it's like a super flag that has more range, but units can score it as well. So it's kind of like a mix between what a circle and a zone would be. There's also this other one here, which is a 6-inch square zone. And this one can be your war machines, your battle engines, and battle group commanders. So that one's the same thing, like rectangle, square, it's just smaller type thing. So these are all newer things that can go on here. Now, here's some interesting stuff is the changes to scoring here. So what they say here is that a model/unit may only control one scenario element at a time, contesting functions identically to the regular steamroller rule. So what this really means is that if you have, 4 zone elements out there, your unit could spread out and have like, okay, a couple of you there, a couple of you there, a couple of you there, and everything's kind of contested. And if one of them doesn't have an enemy in it, boom, I get to control that one. I can't choose to control multiple with the same unit, but it's a way where we'll talk about after. This is really giving a buff to units here. The other thing that really changes here as well is the idea that there is going to be new types of terrain coming in here. So the idea with this is that Clashmachine is designed to be having 10 to 12 pieces of full-size terrain. That's a lot. If they didn't say anything else, this like, we want to have lots of terrain. Like right now, I've been going for like 8 pieces. It was what I've been doing. I think that's kind of like around the norm for most of the players out there, is that they're aiming for something like, 6 to 10 is kind of, I think, the average you see out there right now, with 10 being really high. Probably more commonly you see more like the 6, but now they're saying, no, we want 10 to 12. So they're looking for lots of full-size terrain. Plus they want to be seeing 4 to 6, pieces of scatter terrain, which is kind of a new thing that they're bringing up here. Now, the scatter terrain is something that's supposed to be somewhere between 1 inch to 1 inch to 4 inch by 4 inch. And what this really is something that gives cover. So if you go behind it, you get cover, but you can also kind of like run through it openly. So it's also neat because like large bases can't end their movement partially on it type thing, but if huge bases end on them, then they're just destroying them, right? So it's this weird new piece of terrain that they kind of invented, and they want to see lots of these. This is not like another option. This is like, no, we intend to have like several of these, scattered around, right, all over the place. So typically they feel this is something that is really missing from the game. Otherwise, just talking about the rest of stuff, this is now looking to go 5 rounds. So I find that's interesting too. Like Brawl Machines 5, Steamroller 7. You think this would be 6, but they're going for 5. Otherwise, scoring and stuff is going to be happening exactly like Steamrollers. And then the winner is the person that has 5 or more control points than their opponent when the caster is destroyed, or, if they have the most control points at the end of the round. So it's really the same as a Steamroller. So it's really the same as that. And that's really it. That's the 2 pages. That's all that's here. Now, I want to talk about some negative things I've heard about this. And the first one I want to talk about is why even have this, right? I mean, we already talked about that negative talk we'd heard about Brawl Machine. We're like, why have 25 Brawl Machine? We have Steamroller. You can be playing at any kind of stage here. And now we're hearing the same people saying that about Clash Machine. We could be doing 50 points in Steamroller. Why does this even exist? And I think one of the reasons I'd like to defend Clash Machine right off the bat is that if I was to tell you that next month we're going to a Steamroller, you're automatically thinking at 75. Even though in theory, Steamroller can be played at all these different point sizes, it's not. That's been the problem with Steamroller and like maybe the War Machine community for a long time, is that we've gotten so entrenched in the idea that Steamroller is 75 that if I ran a tournament and it was like, oh, well, by the way, I'm running a Steamroller that's going to be 65 points. You'd be like, what? Why are you doing this? This is ridiculous. I think back to like Mark II, where actually there was like German format or whatever that was like 49 points, which seemed like wacky, but like, sure, why not? But we're now so entrenched that Steamroller is just 75. It is, you hear Steamroller, you think 75. So you almost need something separate just to say, like, fine, you dummies, if you can't really play Steamroller at different sizes, then at the very least, we'll have 25 for Brawl Machine, 50 for the Clashmachine, 75 for Steamroller, and there you go. Now you have kind of more of a gambit. Maybe they'll invent something later for 100 points or something, who knows. But, like, if you are not flexible in your mind to be playing these, we'll just literally make formats that are based to be at that size. So I don't think that's a bad thing, especially when you think of things like Journeyman League, right? A lot of people with the success of Brawl Machine have been like, okay, I want to do Journeyman Leagues, but I want to tie it into Brawl Machine. How do I kind of like scale this up? And this is a way we can be doing that. We're like, okay, week 1, starter box, week 2, Brawl Machine, maybe week 3 is now 2 list Brawl Machine, and then you can go up to 50 points, 1 list, then 2 lists, then 75. Like, this is now something out there where you could be using these to kind of be replacing the old Journeyman League. And I guess I didn't explain that, but it was an old way that we used to do things to kind of like scale things up so that new players or people starting a new faction could slowly grow their force. Then after like, a month or two, you started with nothing and had time to build it up and like, look, now I play Scorn or something like that. So I think it's also a building piece that was nice for that problem that people are finding with the Journeyman Leagues. Now, another issue that people are talking about is the FA1 and the FA2. Kind of the same thing we heard about Brawl Machine. Why are we doing this? At this point, I don't think it even matters. There's enough hitting power. If you want to take 2 Colossals at 50 points, this is to your, your chagrin when you run up against them that's going to crush you, right? Especially if there's all this terrain, right? If there's going to be all this terrain, you might have a really hard time going around with your Colossals. But again, for your new players coming in, I feel that this is a nice thing to do just to make sure we take any of these really negative things off the table. Plus, the newer players are going to want to try and buy whatever they think is going to be good. And financially, some of these huge bases can be a bit of a trap where they look big and flashy, especially the new players. And then they get in, it's like, oh no, what do you mean that? What's that troll one that has like the big barrel that nobody plays? Yeah, that one, right? You don't want people to be running into that trap. So saying in Brawl Machine, like, okay, for balance reasons and for financial reasons, just don't. And I think that same logic applies here as well. Semi-balance reasons, but also financial reasons. Don't go and say like, oh, I have this Brawl Machine to get up here now. I'll just buy a couple of battle engines. No, stop. Maybe get one, try it out, see how it goes type thing. So the whole FA thing, I'm not hearing tons of complaints about it, but a few. And I think that's just the same stuff we heard with Brawl Machine with the FA1. And overall, I think it's a good thing to have there. All right, next thing to talk about is these different scenario elements that we talked about, right? Where now they're trying out these different things with like these different circle zones and the square zones and stuff like this. And part of me really doesn't like this. Now, the reason why I want to say that is because we have all these resources right now to be having these current zones that we have, right? So in the past, I had to have like, it seemed like every steamroller had like a different size piece I had to like cut out and get ready. I have all these paper cutouts out there. But now, like if you want to do like a square inch zone, okay, I can take some of my rectangles and I can cut them in half and then they can work for both. But what am I going to do with these circles? I mean, one option I thought of is that you can take your normal circles right now and kind of like cut out a 6 inch in the middle so that whether you're using it as 6 or the 12, hey, you can be doing that. But then, you're going to kind of keep these pieces together. It kind of looks a little bit weird. So there should either have to be something that is new and put out or just something we have to get used to, right? And maybe as a grumpy old man that didn't want to cut up all the things I have and all that, maybe that's it. I also kind of thought like maybe these circles, we could be taking existing flags and say that, hey, these flags can now be scored on by, not just by being base to base to make it a little bit more user friendly, you have to be within 3 inches. The problem being that flags are designed for solos and your battle group commanders, and whereas these here are also for your units. And I think that's maybe falling into what they're trying to do here. Instead of having like these massive 12-inch zones that are there, what if you broke this up into multiple smaller ones, right? And I feel what they're also trying to do with this is they've seen in their Brawl Machine that units are weak. People are trying to use units in Brawl Machine and they get destroyed. It is a solo, really push game. And we're seeing that in 75 as well, right? Units aren't really doing all that great. However, when you have these multiple zones that units can like spread out and at least contest, and then whatever you don't go into, I'm going to score. Having two 6-6 zones rather than the big 12-inch is a huge advantage for me, because now you, as trying to contest it, need to get something into both, whereas me, the person with a unit, can spread out over them both and saying, I'm contesting you, now you have to worry about contesting me, or else I'm going to start scoring with my unit. So when I think about it that way and what they're trying to do with that, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. I mean, units are weak and they need something right now to pump them up. Now, the 6-inch square zones, where do I kind of settle on that? That one I'm not so sure about. It is already, you sometimes had cases where for the 6x12 colossals or battle engines could be like, boom, I'm going to sit here, and because you just don't have the movement to go around me and get past me, plus you probably take a free strike, I'm just going to lock this down because you can't get into the zone. My big huge base is blocking it. With these 6x6 ones, that should be even easier. So I'm not really sure where the thinking came here. I kind of feel like the circle came first and this came after. But it could also be the idea, and we're going to be talking about these when you talk about their first two scenarios, that it seems like they want to have more of like this cityscape with multiple scoring elements all over the place. And again, if you do this though, right, we just talked about where one huge base can sit here and block it. However, if there's going to be two squares, you're like, well, oh no, I can only score one of these, and so I need to use something to try and be dealing with that, right? Because am I going to be scoring this? All of a sudden, the person with the big, huge blockader is not doing as well as the person that took a couple of heavies instead, right? So it kind of is like breaking you down to the more basics instead of trying to make, like, let's just take solos and colossals or whatever, right? And again, this is kind of moving you away from those anyway because they're only FA1, but even if I was thinking about where these might go into a steamroller. Now, this is where I want to be bringing up this idea here that we should be actually thinking about, that we could say like, oh, those crazy line of sight folks, they're just making up all these crazy rules, like I'm here to play a regular steamroller. One of the things you have to also keep in mind is that Privateer Press does a lot of their development through basically contractors and, external sources. And I'm pretty sure that line of sight is one of those. So whether this is something that Privateer Press said, try this, see how it works, or this is something that, somebody that talks to Privateer Press thinks would be a good idea, and whether if it works, they'll be like, Privateer Press, do this, or maybe it's not even connected at all. Maybe they're not talking at all, but if this does well, Privateer Press will be like, other Privateer Press, look how well that did. This is something that we could be seeing later in a Mark IV. Some of the other complaints that we should be now kind of like introspecting and looking at ourselves reflectively is, we've said when the last couple of steamrollers came out, they've been really safe, right? Again, steamrollers used to be wild. There'd be like, oh, in this one here, it's corner deployment. And in this one here, you have like these reserves that come in from the side. And there's different types of zones. And your objectives, they're all different. Not like now. Like they have literally different stats. And they can like hop around and they can shoot. Like things used to be really crazy. And now things have been very safe for a long time. And people have challenged Privateer Press to try and like stretch their wings and try different things. This is trying different things. So again, whether they're trying to do this to try and liven things up, or whether this is in coordination with Privateer Press for how they could be liven things up, this is something we should be thinking about, right? If this was to come to Steamroller, would this be good or bad? Would the idea of having all these multiple smaller zones, which is now forcing you to be less elite and taking more units and things like that, that could be better for the game? Or at least the idea of better is very personal, so at least it would change things. So we're not always kind of like staying safe in one zone. We're going through things, we're changing things so that you're forced to year change up your list, try different things, right? Different people who enjoy different things can enjoy those things when it's their year and kind of wait, when it's the next year type thing, right? So that's something I think we should really be keeping in mind here. Now, with that, let's now talk about some of the scenarios they put out because they look wacky. And again, this is very pre-release and they haven't had a lot of time to work on them. But if you look at these, because of all these smaller zones, and you have to remember that a lot of times, like these zones could be flags, which we're used to seeing, but when they take up more room, you're like, ah, or like I said, there might be a big, huge circle and now there's 2 circles. But you look at this and there's scenario pieces all over the place and there's terrain all over the place. And it's a very interactive spot. So when you first look at this, you're like, that's crazy. But when you start thinking about like how you'd actually be playing into this, you would need to have a very diverse force that needs to be able to deal with all these different situations, and these different zones are all over the place. So I like seeing that. One thing that has some people worried though is that there is also a diagonal deployment. There's one of those where literally there's the divide goes across corner to corner and you're now going this way. Now, when some of my local groups saw this, one of the comments that came up is like, well, when you're in a tournament and things are table to table to table to table, mat to mat to mat to mat, if you do diagonal, it can get a little hard to try and move over and kind of deploy on that one side. That being said, I also know from playing in my GW days, especially with Warhammer Fantasy, sometimes we did diagonal deployment. Sometimes, this is a 6x4, so kind of like the screen you're looking at now, we were playing this way. And that was still sometimes mat to mat to mat to mat. And it was annoying, but it wasn't that bad, right? When you're playing on a regular 4x4 and you're doing it stuff that's almost at their deployment zone, it's not that far. You can typically deal with it, or if you really need to, you can walk around. But either way, this whole idea at first is like, this is awful. Is it? It really adds some new dynamics to the game, right? We're trying to spice things up. We want things to be more interesting. And when all of a sudden, like for example, when you do diagonal deployment, the amount of room you have really stretches out. Like normally you have 4 inches. Well, when that goes to diagonal, I don't know what the math is, but you have a lot more. So that kind of changes that dynamic. Plus the way that you're going to be having the terrain and the objectives on it can be a lot more interesting because it's not symmetrical anymore, right? Somebody's going to have more room on one corner. Oh boy, let's look at the screen here. On one corner, right? Because when you consider, oh boy, this is gonna be hard. If this was cut across this way, whoever's right here is gonna have more room on this flank and then less room on this flank. There we go. I somehow made this work. I should really just gotten like some art on the screen or something, but worst channel on the internet. So that dynamic is interesting and different. I've also heard where like that one make things weird for ambushers, but does it? Again, that kind of makes you think that, okay, when I'm trying to prepare myself for ambushers, I normally have to watch from both board heads, but now if the ambushers are still having to come in from the 2 sides, well, then you know that one side will be safe, the other side won't, but that's your larger side where you probably want to be putting most of your things. So again, it's just different dynamics. Same thing where normally when you go from the other ways. In a 6x4, that actually means a lot because all of a sudden where you used to have 6 feet, now you just have 4 feet. So you're kind of like crammed in type thing. And there's usually rules where you can't ambush or whatever. On our war machine where there's a 4x4, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. However, can you imagine if playing a lot of these scenarios, which are normally pretty symmetrical, what if you kind of like roll the dice and on a 4+, you didn't play this way, you played this way. And now you're like, oh wow, you just took that scenario, it just went, and all of a sudden it plays very, very differently, right? Stuff like that can just like be something where it just makes things fresh and interesting, right? So a little bit of complications, of course, when you are in a room with mat, but I think we need to be opening our minds to these types of things where if this is the idea where maybe this will be in future steamrollers, maybe this might be part of like a plan for Mark IV or something, it's something we should be opening our eyes to because these are all possibilities and we need to spice things up. Now, I've been talking a lot about maybes and all that type of stuff, and I really feel that's something you need to be keeping in mind, but let's get back to what's actually in here. And the next one is going to be all this terrain and the scatter terrain. Now, having more terrain, not a bad thing. I already said it makes the board more interactive. Having terrain that is different and new, not a bad thing. That happens all the time. Having terrain that you're forced to put on there, that seems weird that they're really pushing these scatter terrains, and I don't feel they're really having a spot that's really missing from the game right now. It is pretty different and interesting. But one part I actually really don't like about them is the idea that there's actually a way where huge bases going on them take them off the battlefield. Because me as a TO needing to like reset the scenario from game to game to game, if I have to go on there and all my scatter terrain or whatever amount of it is on the side, I'm like, damn it, where was that? Okay, let's try and replace these things. Like, it can be a real pain. Sometimes, especially like after lunch, where people are like trying to display their armies and they moved all the terrain to the side, you're like, come on, I gotta redo all this stuff. As a TO, I don't like the idea of removal stuff unless it's the last game and you're helping me pack up, basically. That part is actually okay. So, you know, nice to try new things. Weird that it's forced. Don't like the fact that it can be removed. Otherwise, you know, let's look at this as it was. Again, trying to get away all these dreams and thoughts of like, what if this was now the new steamroller? What about this as a separate 50-point format? I feel, looking at this, that you could play this 50-point format and it would make for a good game, right? You would go into it, it'd be interesting, and it would be different, and it'd be flavorful. However, I feel that's not what we're really looking for currently. I think that we need something, like I said, that kind of really spans that gap between 25 points and 50 points. And it's nice thing if that's in a linear line where like one thing builds to the next, but this is kind of like pretty far out there, right? Once you take all these different rules and mix it together, I would hate to have a person that's starting and you're like, hey, let's play some Brawl Machine. They learn some Brawl Machine. Then they come in and they play some Clash Machine. And they're like, yeah, sure. And they're playing and they're loving Clash Machine. And then like, hey, now let's do some Steamroller. And they do a regular 75-point game. And they're like, well, wait a second. Where are all the smaller 6-inch zones? What do you mean my unit's not contesting and can control any one of these things I want? This is completely different. Where's the scatter terrain? So that disconnect, I am not a fan of. This is again, now just looking at this, assuming that this won't be the future of Steamroller, but this is just this. And one of the suggestions I've heard, and we kind of talked about at the start of this, is maybe just keep this simple. Just say that from the very beginning here, where really it's a 50-point version, things are now FA2, you have that different rule for your huge bases, done. That's Clash Machine. And then maybe, you know, these other things about the different scenario elements and the extra terrain and stuff like that, that could be like a separate thing. This is like if you want to try different scenarios. Line of Sight has like all these interesting scenarios you can play in whatever format. Or maybe for terrain, they have this like separate package of like very characterful terrain they can be using for any format. I feel like having those things put into here breaks that linear flow between the three formats, and maybe that's not what they're looking for, right? Maybe they developed this saying like this is going to be different and interesting, but to me, I see more benefit in this being a growth from 25 to 50 for 75, more looking at those new players, especially we're in a spot right now where after the pandemic, we need to regrow this community. So overall, getting to the end of this, I don't want to be rambling on this too long, you know, big, huge shout out to Line of Sight. You did tons of work on Brawl Machine. It was a massive success. I'm sure that you have big plans for this. And I know that, you know, as much as we say bad things for this, we have to really keep in mind that, and we're saying a lot of good things about it too, but anything that we might say negatively, we have to realize that this is just like an idea that kind of like took flight before you were kind of really ready. And there's still a lot more development to happen, right? Like even the name's not even settled on right now type thing. So thank you for all the work you're doing for making all these different formats and trying to build up the community. I feel that this could have a really great place. If you're working with Privateer Press and these are ideas for Steamroller, I'm all for it. I'm all for really spicing things up and making things interesting. So there you go. That's Clash Machine. I'm going to have a link down to it below. I guess I should have mentioned that at the very beginning, but I think it's something that's worth going out and checking out and at least trying it, because then you can give some real feedback to the Line of Sight folks so that when they do come out with the official Clash Machine, it has all that feedback in there. Last thing I want to be talking about is my Patreon. Big, huge thanks to all of my patrons who are really helping me make these types of videos. I mean, I got a couple of new ones already in the last couple of weeks here, and I'm almost at the spot I'm like past halfway where I'm now my next stretch goal, which is getting a new camera. This thing is old. I would love to get new stuff. Maybe I can make something with mics so it'd be a lot better for doing battle reports. Again, making these improvements to the channel is something that you're making possible. So to like my content overlords, Boyd and Darrell, and to my manipulators, Adrian, Dorian, Jordan, and Sloth Monarchy, thank you so much. And of course to all the other supporters. And yeah, if you have interest in that, of course, there's a link down below, but otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.